What if the place you chose for a peaceful night's rest was actually a doorway to the unknown? As you drift off, you may feel a chill in the air and hear whispers that echo through the walls. You're not alone. The spirits of those who once walked these halls linger, waiting for a moment of connection. In this collection of chilling tales, you'll discover that the scariest encounters often happen where you least expect them, behind the closed doors of haunted hotels. Are you ready to uncover the chilling truths that lie within? Chapter 1. The Stanley Hotel, Colorado, USA. The Stanley Hotel looms in Estes Park, Colorado, a grand structure that exudes elegance by day but shifts into something far more sinister as night falls. Famously known for inspiring Stephen King's The Shining, the hotel is a magnet for paranormal investigators and terrified guests alike. But its reputation for being haunted is not just folklore or fiction. It is based on countless real experiences. Step inside, and you'll soon find yourself immersed in a world where the veil between life and death seems to blur. Room 217 is perhaps the most infamous part of the Stanley Hotel. Stephen King himself stayed in this room in 1974, reporting vivid nightmares that led him to write his legendary novel. But King's experience pales in comparison to the eerie events that others have encountered. Many guests who have stayed in room 217 have reported waking in the middle of the night to a presence in the room. A common occurrence involves the sensation of someone sitting on the bed, only for the guest to find that no one is there. Others have described hearing faint whispers and footsteps in the hallway when no one else was staying on the floor. A particularly chilling account from a couple staying in room 217 describes waking to find their suitcases unpacked, clothes folded neatly in the drawers, despite both swearing they hadn't touched their luggage since checking in. The most famous spirit believed to reside in room 217 is that of Elizabeth Wilson, a former housekeeper who survived a gas explosion in the room in 1911. Since her death, it is said she still watches over her old domain. Guests report feeling a cold breeze pass through them, and some women have claimed they were physically pushed out of the bed at night, as though someone or something did not approve of their presence. Walking up the grand staircase at the Stanley Hotel feels like a step back in time, but it's more than just nostalgia that haunts these steps. Many guests have recounted the disorienting experience of feeling eyes on them as they ascend. Even more unsettling are the ghostly figures that have been photographed near the staircase. One of the most famous photos was taken by a visitor who snapped a picture of the empty stairs, only to later find a woman in period clothing standing there, glaring back at the camera. It's not uncommon for people to hear faint, disembodied laughter, often that of children, echoing through the halls surrounding the staircase. The sound is eerie, distant, and always just out of reach. Those who have tried to investigate further find nothing but silence when they arrive at the source of the sound. Guests have also reported seeing children running through the halls, only for them to vanish into thin air. Some speculate that these spirits are remnants of a time when children stayed at the hotel during the early 1900s. What they want, no one knows. The sound of children's laughter is one of the more common occurrences at the Stanley Hotel, and it has unnerved many an unsuspecting guest. Though there are no records of tragic deaths involving children on the property, visitors frequently report hearing them play in the hallways, especially on the fourth floor. Guests recount the unnerving experience of hearing small feet running down the hall at night, giggling as if playing a game of tag. When they peek out into the hallway, they find it empty, save for the lingering echo of laughter fading into the distance. One family staying in room 401 described hearing children giggling outside their door late one night. When they opened the door to reprimand the noisy kids, there was no one there. The couple, confused but not yet alarmed, returned to bed. Moments later, the laughter resumed, this time accompanied by the distinct sound of a ball bouncing down the hallway. Determined to find the source, the father bolted out of bed and into the hallway, but again found nothing. The sound stopped as soon as he stepped into the corridor, leaving him shaken for the rest of their stay. Objects moving on their own is another common phenomenon at the Stanley Hotel. Housekeeping staff frequently report finding furniture rearranged in rooms that were previously in perfect order. Some guests have watched in horror as their personal belongings are moved before their very eyes. In one well-documented incident, a man staying in room 428 witnessed a heavy chair slide across the floor in the middle of the night. Frozen in terror, he watched as the chair dragged itself from one side of the room to the other, with no logical explanation. Another couple described how, after settling into bed, they watched their suitcase slowly unzip itself as though an invisible hand was rummaging through their things. In the concert hall, a ghost named Paul is said to enjoy his mischievous pranks. Paul worked at the Stanley Hotel until his death in 2005 and has reportedly remained in the concert hall ever since. Workers in the hall claim to hear him whispering, "Get out," late at night, a command that, when ignored, is followed by lights flickering or objects being knocked over. For some, the Stanley Hotel is more than a haunted attraction. It's a living nightmare. One former employee quit on the spot after being locked in a storage room by an unseen force. Visitors have reported feeling taps on their shoulders or being brushed by unseen hands while exploring the hotel. And it's not just the ghost stories that make the Stanley Hotel a place of dread. Guests frequently describe an overwhelming sense of being watched, as though unseen eyes follow them through every room and hallway. The Stanley Hotel is not just a setting for fiction. It is a place where the line between the living and the dead is blurred. Whether you are a skeptic or a believer, the experiences of those who have stayed there are difficult to ignore. Ghostly children, shadowy apparitions, and objects that move on their own make the Stanley a hotel where the past never truly lets go of the present. Chapter 2. The Langham Hotel, London, UK. The Langham Hotel stands proudly in the heart of London, a symbol of opulence with a dark undercurrent. Since opening in 1865, it has been a home to luxury, but also a place steeped in mystery, where the living and the dead seem to cohabitate. Beneath its refined exterior, guests and staff alike whisper of apparitions, cold spots, and unsettling encounters with those who never checked out. As night falls, the Langham's corridors become a labyrinth of shadows, echoing with the past. Room 333 is the most infamous of all the haunted spaces in the Langham. It is said that a ghostly figure, dressed in military attire, haunts the room, his appearance a harbinger of dread. This spectral figure is believed to be the spirit of a German soldier who died during World War I, though his exact identity remains unknown. What is certain, however, is that those who have encountered him have never forgotten it. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a BBC reporter staying at the hotel in the 1970s. Late one night, he awoke to see a man dressed in full military regalia standing at the foot of his bed. The figure's eyes burned with an unnatural light, and as the reporter lay frozen in terror, the soldier began to slowly approach the bed. Before the man could scream, the apparition vanished, leaving the room icy cold. For the rest of the night, the reporter was unable to shake the feeling that he was being watched, though the room remained empty. More recently, another guest staying in room 333 reported a similar experience. After an evening out, she returned to find the room much colder than it had been when she left. As she prepared for bed, she caught movement in the corner of her eye. Turning, she saw the outline of a man standing by the window, staring out into the night. She tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light, but the figure turned to face her. As their eyes met, she felt an overwhelming wave of sorrow and dread. She fled the room, spending the rest of the night in the hotel lobby, too terrified to return. Another ghostly figure known to roam the Langham's halls is a Victorian-era doctor, a figure shrouded in both mystery and horror. According to legend, the doctor had come to the Langham with his wife for a romantic getaway, but something sinister brewed behind closed doors. During their stay, the doctor reportedly murdered his wife before taking his own life in a fit of madness. Since then, his restless spirit is said to stalk the hotel, forever replaying the tragic events of that fateful night. One couple staying on the 4th floor, near where the murder is believed to have occurred, experienced a terrifying encounter that still haunts them to this day. In the dead of night, they were awoken by the sound of weeping, a low, mournful cry that seemed to come from the very walls. The husband got up to investigate, only to be hit with an overwhelming sense of dread. The air around him felt heavy, thick with something unseen yet undeniably present. As he approached the door, the sobbing grew louder, now joined by faint whispers, as if a violent argument was taking place just beyond their room. The couple's story did not end there. The next morning, they reported hearing the sound of footsteps pacing outside their door in the early hours, accompanied by the occasional shadow slipping under the gap. It wasn't until they later learned of the hotel's haunted history that they realized the ghostly visitor might have been the murderous doctor, still reliving his final moments. Guests at the Langham frequently report sudden cold spots, areas in the hotel where the temperature drops without explanation. These icy chills often occur in hallways or staircases, but sometimes guests find their rooms turning unbearably cold in the middle of the night. It's as if an unseen presence passes through, leaving behind a wake of freezing air. One guest, staying on the third floor, recounted waking in the early hours of the morning to find her room unusually cold. She reached for the blanket, only to discover that it had been pulled halfway off the bed, as though someone had tugged it in the night. Still groggy, she pulled the covers back over herself, only for them to be yanked off once again, this time with force. She sat bolt upright, her heart racing, but the room was empty. The door was locked, and no one else had access to the room. That night, she slept with the lights on, though she barely slept at all. Many of the Langham's guests have reported hearing soft whispers late at night, disembodied voices that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sometimes the voices are unintelligible, like a distant conversation just out of earshot. Other times, they are clear, with guests claiming to hear their names being called from the shadows. A man staying at the hotel for a business trip described a particularly unsettling incident in which he heard a voice whispering his name as he drifted off to sleep. Initially, he thought it was part of a dream, but the voice became more persistent, more demanding. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw a figure standing at the foot of his bed, no face, just a dark outline. In a heartbeat, it was gone, leaving him breathless and drenched in sweat. Another guest, staying alone in a corner suite, heard what sounded like a faint conversation coming from the adjoining room. When she complained to the front desk, they informed her that no one was staying in the adjacent room that night. She returned to her room, unnerved but determined to get some sleep. As she lay in bed, the whispers returned, louder this time. Though the voices were muffled, she could make out snippets of a conversation, two people arguing in hushed tones. The sounds persisted for hours, stopping only as dawn began to break. For those who dare to stay at the Langham Hotel, the encounters are not just fleeting glimpses of the past, but full-body experiences that leave a lasting impact. Cold hands brushing your skin, whispers that seem to follow you down the halls, and figures that step out from the shadows. These are the stories that countless guests have lived through. The Langham Hotel is not just a relic of history. It is alive with it, and some of its guests may never truly leave. Chapter 3. The Queen Mary Hotel, Long Beach, USA. The RMS Queen Mary floats in Long Beach, California, no longer the grand ocean liner it once was, but a ghostly relic of a bygone era. Now a floating hotel, the Queen Mary carries with it a dark history. Behind its luxurious facade, this massive vessel hides decades of ghost stories, sightings of long-dead passengers and crew members who still seem to walk its halls, trapped between worlds. For those brave enough to stay the night, the Queen Mary offers more than just a glimpse into the past. It offers something far more terrifying, an encounter with the unexplained. Perhaps the most famous spirit aboard the Queen Mary is the enigmatic Lady in White, often seen gliding down the ship's hallways. Dressed in an elegant, flowing white gown, she is usually spotted near the ship's first-class suites. Her identity remains a mystery, but those who have seen her describe a ghostly figure who appears to be from the 1930s or 1940s, her pale face hauntingly beautiful, her expression one of profound sadness. One guest, staying in a luxury suite on a quiet evening, recounted an encounter that still chills her to this day. She had returned to her room after an evening of cocktails and was preparing for bed when she heard soft footsteps just outside her door. Opening the door to check, she was startled to see a woman dressed in a long, white gown walking slowly down the corridor. The guest called out to her, but the woman did not turn around. Instead, she simply vanished before her eyes, as if dissolving into the very air. Other guests have reported similar sightings of the lady in white. Some say they've seen her standing on the ship's grand staircase, gazing out into the ocean as if waiting for someone who never arrived. There's an unshakable sadness that accompanies her presence, as though her spirit is eternally trapped on the ship, unable to move on from whatever tragic event left her behind. The Queen Mary's first and second-class swimming pools are now closed to the public, but they remain hotbeds of paranormal activity. Despite being empty for decades, the sounds of splashing water and distant laughter echo through the pool decks late at night. Guests and staff have reported seeing wet footprints appear on the deck, as though someone had just stepped out of the pool. Yet, there is no water, no swimmers, just the eerie remnants of a past long gone. One of the most chilling tales comes from a maintenance worker who was performing routine checks near the first-class pool late one evening. As he walked through the dimly lit room, he suddenly heard the distinct sound of a young girl laughing. Turning toward the source, he saw the fleeting image of a little girl in a bathing suit standing near the pool's edge. Her features were blurry, like a figure out of focus in a photograph. Before he could move or speak, she dove into the empty pool. Rushing to the edge, he looked down, only to find the pool dry and empty. The worker quit the next day, unable to shake the image of the ghostly girl plunging into a pool that no longer held any water. Many believe this girl is Jackie, a spirit said to haunt the Queen Mary for decades. Jackie is thought to have drowned in the pool during the ship's heyday, and her restless spirit never left. Guests frequently report hearing her voice echoing through the pool area, calling out for help or playfully giggling, as if unaware of her fate. The ship's engine room is another notorious hotspot for paranormal activity. Deep within the bowels of the Queen Mary, the engine room is where some of the ship's most gruesome accidents occurred. Most famously, Door 13, a heavy metal door in the engine room, was the site of a tragic death in 1966. A crew member was crushed to death by the door during a routine drill. Since then, his ghost is said to linger near the door, and strange occurrences have been reported by those brave enough to venture into the engine room. A tour guide leading a group through the engine room, late one night, recounted hearing the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps behind her, even though no one was there. As she reached door 13, the air grew unnaturally cold. Then, from behind her, a deep, guttural voice muttered something unintelligible. When she turned, the room was empty. Several other staff members have reported hearing similar voices near door 13, often accompanied by the sound of metal scraping against metal, as though the heavy door was being forced open by unseen hands. All throughout the Queen Mary, guests and staff have reported hearing ghostly knocks and footsteps in empty hallways. These sounds are often accompanied by the feeling of being watched, an overwhelming sense that someone or something is lurking just out of sight. One guest staying in a second-class cabin described hearing persistent knocking on her cabin door late at night. At first, she thought it was another guest playing a prank, but when she opened the door, the hallway was completely empty. She returned to bed, only for the knocking to start again, louder this time, more insistent. After the third time, she called the front desk, but no one had been near her room. When she checked out the next morning, she learned that her cabin was notorious for paranormal activity, and other guests had reported the exact same knocking. Another guest staying in a cabin near the stern of the ship reported hearing footsteps pacing the hallway outside his room throughout the night. At first, he assumed it was a fellow guest, but when he stepped into the hallway, it was empty. The footsteps, however, did not stop. They continued, right in front of him, echoing off the steel walls, as though an invisible figure was pacing back and forth in agitation. The Queen Mary is more than just a historical relic. It is a place where the past refuses to let go. From the lady in white to the ghostly children in the pool areas, the ship is a vessel not only for memories but for spirits that seem unable to move on. Guests who stay the night on the Queen Mary often leave with more than just memories of a charming hotel stay. They leave with stories of cold spots, unexplained sounds, and glimpses of figures that should no longer be there. For those who believe, the Queen Mary is a ghost ship, haunted by the souls of those who died aboard or loved it too much to ever leave. For skeptics, it is a mystery, an enigma, one that leaves even the most rational minds questioning what truly haunts the decks of this once great liner. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing is certain. The Queen Mary is a ship bound not just by water, but by the shadows of its haunted past. Chapter 4. Hotel del Salto, Colombia. Perched on the edge of a towering cliff, the Hotel del Salto looms over the Tequendama Falls like a specter itself. Its once grand facade, now a crumbling relic of a forgotten era. Built in 1923, the hotel was originally a luxurious retreat for Colombia's elite, offering stunning views of the Bogotá River as it plunged over the cliffside into the misty abyss below. But as the years wore on, the hotel became a place of darkness, its reputation forever marred by tales of tragedy and death. Today it stands abandoned, but those who dare to venture near its haunted halls and the nearby gorge claim that not all who entered the hotel ever truly left. The Hotel del Salto's sinister reputation stems from its location atop the cliff that overlooks the majestic, yet treacherous Tequendama Falls. Over the years, many desperate souls chose this very spot to end their lives, throwing themselves into the roaring waters below. Their tragic deaths have left an indelible mark on the hotel, and it is said that the spirits of the departed still wander its halls and the surrounding cliffs, trapped between this world and the next. One of the most chilling aspects of the hotel's haunting is the appearance of shadowy figures near the cliff's edge, where the falls cascade into the abyss. Locals and visitors alike have reported seeing dark silhouettes standing dangerously close to the precipice, only for the figures to disappear into the mist before their eyes. Some believe these apparitions are the restless spirits of those who leaped to their deaths, forever bound to the site of their final moments. A tour guide, leading a group of visitors near the hotel one misty afternoon, recounted a terrifying encounter. As the group approached the edge of the cliff, the guide noticed a figure standing motionless near the falls, facing the gorge. The figure, dressed in dark clothing, appeared to be staring into the churning waters below. Concerned for the person's safety, the guide called out, but there was no response. As he drew closer, the figure seemed to dissolve into the mist, vanishing before his eyes. The group was left shaken, knowing they had just witnessed something otherworldly. Others have reported hearing faint cries or sobbing coming from the direction of the falls, even when no one else is around. The sounds seemed to echo off the cliffs, mingling with the roar of the waterfall, leaving those who hear them with an overwhelming sense of sorrow and unease. The gorge, once a place of natural beauty, now feels like a gateway to something far darker. The hotel itself, now abandoned and decaying, is no less haunted than the cliffs below. Visitors who have explored the crumbling structure describe feeling inexplicable cold drafts that seem to come from nowhere, even on the warmest days. These icy gusts often carry with them a sense of dread, as though something unseen is moving through the dilapidated halls. One urban explorer, who visited the hotel with a group of friends, recounted an experience that still haunts her. As they wandered through the decaying ballroom, once filled with music and laughter, she suddenly felt a sharp drop in temperature. Her breath turned visible in the air, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched came over her. She turned to her friends, but they seemed unaffected. As they continued exploring, she felt the cold following her from room to room, as if something was trailing her footsteps. When they finally left the building, the temperature returned to normal, but the feeling of being watched did not fade. Other explorers have reported hearing soft whispers coming from the empty rooms, as if disembodied voices were having conversations just out of earshot. Some have even claimed to feel a cold hand brush against their skin, only to find themselves alone. The hotel, though empty, feels alive with unseen presences, each room holding the weight of its tragic history. The rooms of the Hotel del Salto, once luxurious retreats for Colombia's wealthy elite, are now empty and decaying, but they are far from abandoned. Many visitors have reported seeing apparitions in the old rooms, ghostly figures that appear briefly before fading into the shadows. One such story comes from a pair of explorers who ventured into the hotel at night, drawn by the allure of its haunted reputation. As they made their way through the upper floors, they noticed a faint light coming from one of the rooms. Thinking another group of explorers might be inside, they cautiously approached the doorway. To their horror, they saw a figure standing by the window, its back turned to them. The figure appeared to be a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her long hair cascading down her back. They called out to her, but she did not respond. Instead, she slowly turned to face them, revealing a pale, emotionless face. Before they could react, the figure vanished, leaving the room in darkness. Another visitor, exploring the hotel during the day, described seeing the faint outline of a person standing in one of the rooms as he passed by. He assumed it was another visitor, but when he stepped inside, the room was empty. The sense of unease was palpable, and he quickly left, not wanting to encounter whatever presence lingered there. Local legends suggest that the Tequendama falls themselves are cursed, and that those who take their own lives here are doomed to wander the earth as lost souls. The indigenous Muisca people believe that the falls were a sacred place, where spirits could pass into the afterlife. But for those who died by suicide, the transition was not so simple. Their spirits, burdened by unresolved pain and sorrow, are said to remain trapped, unable to find peace. Visitors to the Hotel del Salto often report a sense of overwhelming sadness as they approach the cliffs. Some have even described feeling an inexplicable urge to leap into the falls themselves, as though the spirits of the departed are calling out to them, urging them to join them in their watery grave. This eerie pull has led many to believe that the hotel and the falls are imbued with a dark, malevolent energy, one that feeds on the despair of those who visit. The Hotel del Salto stands as a testament to both beauty and tragedy, its haunted halls echoing with the stories of those who met their untimely end at the cliffs below. For those who dare to explore its crumbling remains, the hotel offers more than just a glimpse into Colombia's past. It offers a chilling reminder that some spirits refuse to rest. Whether it's the shadowy figures at the gorge, the cold drafts that stalk its halls, or the ghostly apparitions that appear in its rooms, the Hotel del Salto remains one of the most haunted places in South America, a place where the line between the living and the dead is perilously thin. Chapter 5. Ballygally Castle Hotel, Northern Ireland. Perched along the rugged Antrim coast, Ballygally Castle stands as a striking, medieval fortress, its stony exterior weathered by centuries of wind and rain. But beneath the picturesque facade lies a chilling history, one soaked in tragedy, betrayal, and death. Now a luxury hotel, Ballygally Castle is home not only to guests seeking a romantic getaway, but to something far darker, spirits who have long refused to leave. Among the many stories of hauntings within these ancient walls, the most famous belongs to Lady Isabella Shaw. Her tragic end, and the sorrow that followed, has left an indelible mark on the castle, her restless spirit doomed to wander its cold, narrow corridors. Many guests have encountered her over the years, feeling her icy presence, hearing her faint footsteps, or even glimpsing her spectral figure. But Lady Isabella is not alone. Ballygally Castle is said to be home to many other spirits, their secrets and sorrows still echoing through its haunted halls. The legend of Lady Isabella Shaw's death is one of cruelty and despair. In the early 17th century, Lady Isabella married Lord James Shaw, the owner of Ballygally Castle. According to local legend, their marriage was far from happy. Lord Shaw, a controlling and ruthless man, desperately wanted a male heir, and when Lady Isabella gave birth to a daughter instead, his fury knew no bounds. He locked her in a tiny room at the top of the castle's tower, cutting her off from the outside world. Desperate and alone, Lady Isabella attempted to escape, but in her haste, she fell from the tower to her death. Some say she was trying to flee from her husband's cruelty, while others believe she may have been pushed. Regardless of the circumstances, her death marked the beginning of a haunting that would last for centuries. Guests and staff have reported encountering Lady Isabella's ghost, especially near the tower where she met her tragic end. Her presence is often accompanied by the sound of soft, measured footsteps, as though she is pacing the halls, searching for the child she never had the chance to raise. Some have even claimed to hear the distant wail of a mother's grief, carried on the cold winds that whip around the castle at night. The tower room where Lady Isabella was imprisoned has become a focal point of paranormal activity. Known as the Ghost Room, it remains one of the most haunted parts of the castle. Guests brave enough to stay in the room have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness, as if the walls themselves are imbued with Lady Isabella's despair. One guest, visiting the castle with her husband, decided to explore the tower late one night. As she stepped into the small, dimly lit room, she felt an intense chill in the air, despite the fact that it was a warm summer evening. Her breath turned visible, and a deep sense of sorrow washed over her. Suddenly, she heard a soft knocking sound, as though someone was tapping on the walls. When she turned to leave, she felt a cold hand brush against her arm, though no one else was in the room. Other guests have reported hearing footsteps pacing back and forth outside the tower room, only to find the hallway empty when they check. The sound of a woman sobbing has also been heard, faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the tower. These eerie occurrences have led many to believe that Lady Isabella's spirit remains trapped within the tower, her sorrow and anger keeping her tethered to the place where she died. Lady Isabella is not the only spirit said to haunt Balagali Castle. Over the years, guests and staff have reported seeing shadowy figures drifting through the castle's historic halls, particularly in the older, less renovated sections. These apparitions are often fleeting, seen out of the corner of one's eye, only to vanish when looked at directly. One guest, staying in a room on the second floor, woke in the middle of the night to the sound of soft footsteps just outside her door. She assumed it was another guest returning to their room. But when the footsteps stopped directly outside her door and she heard a faint whispering, she grew uneasy. Gathering her courage, she opened the door, expecting to see someone standing there, but the hallway was empty. As she stood in the doorway, the temperature dropped sharply, and she felt a cold gust of air rush past her, as though something unseen had just moved through the space. In another chilling account, a couple staying in the castle for their anniversary reported seeing a figure standing at the end of the hall late one night. At first, they thought it was another guest, but as they approached, the figure, a woman in a long, old-fashioned gown, seemed to dissolve into the shadows, disappearing before their eyes. The couple, both firm skeptics of the paranormal, left the castle the next morning, shaken and unsure of what they had witnessed. Beyond the apparitions and eerie footsteps, guests have also experienced other strange phenomena within the castle's historic rooms. Many have reported sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature, often accompanied by a feeling of being watched. Others have described objects moving on their own, doors that creak open in the dead of night, lights that flicker on and off, and personal items that disappear, only to reappear in strange places. One guest, staying in a room on the third floor, woke up to find her suitcase had been moved from one side of the room to the other during the night. She distinctly remembered placing it by the door before she went to bed, but in the morning, it was sitting by the window, as though someone had carefully carried it across the room. No one else had entered her room, and the door had remained locked from the inside all night. Another guest, a man who had stayed at the castle several times before, experienced a strange encounter in the dining room. As he was enjoying breakfast one morning, he noticed a figure standing just inside the doorway, a tall man dressed in what appeared to be 19th century clothing. The man nodded at him, then turned and walked out of the room. Thinking it was part of the castle's historical charm, the guest mentioned the figure to a member of staff, only to be told that no one dressed in period clothing worked at the castle. The guest left that day with more questions than answers, but the image of the tall man in the doorway stayed with him long after. Balagali Castle, with its picturesque views and historic charm, is also a place where the past refuses to let go. Lady Isabella Shaw, forever searching for her lost child, is just one of the many spirits that still walk the castle's halls. For those who stay the night, the castle offers more than just a glimpse into Northern Ireland's rich history. It offers a chance to encounter the otherworldly. Whether it's the sound of soft footsteps echoing through the corridors, the sight of a shadowy figure lingering in the tower, or the inexplicable chill in the air, Ballygally Castle remains a place where the veil between the living and the dead is perilously thin. Chapter 6. The Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel, Canada. Nestled in the heart of the Canadian Rockies, the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel stands as a grand testament to old-world elegance. Its stone turrets and towering arches rise out of the mountains like a castle from a fairy tale, but beneath its luxurious exterior lies a darker story, a legacy of tragedy and loss that refuses to rest. Guests who step into this historic hotel are often drawn not just by its beauty, but by the unsettling sense that something unseen lingers within its halls. Among the many stories of hauntings at the Banff Springs, the most famous is that of the Burning Bride, a ghostly figure who is said to wander the grand staircase, eternally reliving the terror of her final moments. The legend of the bride begins in the 1920s, when a young woman was preparing to celebrate the happiest day of her life. Her wedding was to be held at the Banff Springs, and she had planned every detail to perfection. But fate had other plans. As the story goes, the bride was descending the grand staircase in her flowing white gown when a gust of wind caused her dress to brush against one of the open flames that lined the hall. Her gown caught fire, and in her panic, she lost her footing and tumbled down the stairs to her death. It is said that her spirit never left the hotel, and that she still haunts the very staircase where her life was so cruelly cut short. Over the years, many guests and staff have reported seeing the bride's ghost on the grand staircase, her figure wreathed in flames, silently retracing her final steps. One guest, who was staying at the hotel for a winter holiday, described seeing a woman in a flowing white dress at the top of the stairs late one evening. At first, the guest thought she had stumbled upon a late-night wedding, but as she watched, the woman's dress seemed to shimmer in the dim light, as though it were made of smoke or mist. Suddenly, the woman turned, and for a brief moment, the guest could see the flames flickering at the hem of her gown. The ghostly bride began to descend the stairs, her face expressionless, her movements slow and deliberate. Before the guest could react, the figure vanished, leaving nothing but an eerie chill in the air. Another couple, visiting Banff for their anniversary, had a similarly chilling experience. As they were returning to their room late at night, they noticed a faint light flickering near the grand staircase. Curious, they approached and saw what appeared to be a woman standing halfway down the stairs, her white gown glowing softly in the darkness. The couple watched in stunned silence as the figure began to descend, her feet barely touching the steps. As she reached the bottom, the bride suddenly burst into flames, her entire form consumed in a flash of fire before disappearing without a trace. The couple fled to their room, shaken by the terrifying sight. While the bride is the most famous of the hotel's spirits, she is not the only one to linger in the Fairmont Banff Springs. Guests have also reported hearing ghostly music echoing through the halls, as if an unseen orchestra is playing a waltz for dancers long gone. The music is said to be faint, but unmistakable, a haunting melody that seems to drift through the air, growing louder and then fading away as if carried by an invisible wind. One guest, who had come to the hotel for a weekend retreat, described hearing the eerie music late one night. She had been walking down one of the hotel's long, dimly lit corridors when she heard the soft strains of a violin and piano coming from the ballroom. Thinking that a late-night event was still going on, she followed the sound, but as she reached the ballroom doors, the music abruptly stopped. Puzzled, she opened the doors and stepped inside, only to find the room completely empty. The lights were off, the tables and chairs arranged neatly, as though no one had been there for hours. As she turned to leave, the music started again, faint but clear, seeming to come from all around her. Terrified, she ran back to her room and spent the rest of the night listening to the ghostly waltz playing faintly through the walls. Another visitor, a business traveler, reported hearing the same music in the early hours of the morning. He had woken up to the sound of soft, lilting music drifting through the hallway outside his room. Thinking it was just a nearby guest playing a radio, he tried to go back to sleep, but the music grew louder, as if it were coming closer. When he opened the door to check, the hallway was empty, and the music immediately stopped. Uneasy, he closed the door and tried to sleep, but the music returned, this time accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps, as though a pair of dancers were gliding down the hall outside his room. The traveler spent the rest of the night wide awake, unwilling to open the door again. The bride and the ghostly waltz are not the only paranormal occurrences that guests have experienced at the Fairmont Banff Springs. Over the years, the hotel has seen its share of mysterious deaths and unexplained accidents, many of which have fueled its haunted reputation. One such story involves a bellman named Sam Macaulay, who worked at the hotel in the mid-20th century. Known for his friendly demeanor and impeccable service, Sam continued to serve guests even after his death in the 1970s. Several guests have reported encountering an elderly bellman dressed in an old-fashioned uniform, who helps them with their luggage or directs them to their rooms. However, when they try to tip him or thank him, the man simply vanishes. One guest, staying at the hotel for a business conference, described meeting the mysterious bellman late one night after getting lost in the hotel's maze-like hallways. The man, who appeared to be in his 60s, kindly offered to show her the way to her room, even helping her with her luggage. As they reached the door to her suite, the guest turned to thank him, but the bellman was gone, her luggage sitting neatly by the door, but no sign of the man who had carried it there. Another guest, visiting the hotel with her family, encountered the ghostly bellman in the lobby late at night. She and her husband had been returning from a walk when they saw an elderly man in a bellman's uniform standing by the front desk. He nodded at them, but when they approached to ask for directions, the man disappeared before their eyes, leaving them both stunned and shaken. The Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel, with its breathtaking mountain views and historic charm, is also a place where the past refuses to be forgotten. From the tragic tale of the burning bride to the eerie strains of ghostly music, the hotel is steeped in stories of the supernatural. For those who stay the night, the Fairmont Banff Springs offers more than just luxury and comfort. It offers a glimpse into the unknown, where the line between the living and the dead is as thin as the mountain air that surrounds it. Whether it's the flicker of a ghostly flame on the grand staircase or the soft waltz of unseen dancers, the spirits of Banff Springs continue to haunt its halls, ensuring that the hotel's legacy will never fade into history. Chapter 7. Hotel Berchiani, Florence, Italy. Florence, with its cobbled streets and Renaissance charm, is a city of timeless beauty, but hidden within its elegant facade are whispers of the supernatural. The Hotel Berchiani, once a grand palazzo that housed nobility, stands in the heart of the city, its stone walls holding centuries of history. But those who have stayed here will tell you that something more than history lingers in the air. Shadows move where they shouldn't, cold drafts sweep through closed rooms, and guests report the unmistakable feeling of being watched, even when they're completely alone. The Berchiani, with its luxurious exterior, hides a chilling secret: ghosts that refuse to leave. The hotel's eerie reputation centers around three main apparitions: the spirit of a child who roams the corridors, a maid who continues her duties even in death, and a mysterious figure who watches over guests as they sleep. Each of these entities has been seen and felt by numerous guests over the years, their presence as palpable as the cold shiver that follows their sightings. This chapter delves into these haunting encounters, all drawn from real testimonies of those who have stayed at the Hotel Berchiani and left with more than just memories of Florence's beauty. Guests staying at the Berchiani often describe hearing the sound of small, quick footsteps echoing through the long, dimly lit corridors late at night. These footsteps, accompanied by the faint, disembodied laughter of a child, have been reported by countless visitors who have stayed at the hotel. However, there is never any physical evidence of a child present, no matter how hard guests search for the source of the noise. One particularly chilling account comes from a woman who was visiting Florence with her young daughter. They had settled into their room for the night when the woman was awakened by the sound of running footsteps outside the door, as if a child were playing in the hallway. Thinking it was her daughter, she called out, but her daughter remained sound asleep beside her. The footsteps continued, getting louder, racing up and down the corridor. When she opened the door to confront the noisy child, she was met with an empty hallway, silent, except for the faint sound of a child's laughter trailing off into the darkness. Other guests have described feeling a tug on their clothing, as if a small hand were pulling at them, or the sensation of someone rushing past them, though no one is there. One man, staying in the hotel for a business trip, felt a light brush against his leg while walking through the corridor at night. Thinking it was a child running past, he looked down, but there was nothing there. Startled, he continued walking, only to hear the distinct sound of giggling behind him. He quickened his pace, but the laughter followed him, growing louder until he reached his room and shut the door, heart pounding. Perhaps the most unsettling accounts from the Burkiani involve the feeling of being watched while sleeping. Several guests have reported waking in the middle of the night to find a figure standing at the foot of their bed, watching them in silence. This figure is often described as a shadowy, human shape, sometimes more distinct, but always silent, unmoving, and cold. One woman, traveling alone, had the misfortune of encountering this spectral presence. She awoke in the early hours of the morning, her room dark and silent, except for the faint sound of her own breathing. But something felt wrong. She could sense that she wasn't alone. Slowly, she opened her eyes and saw, to her horror, a figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was a man, or at least the silhouette of one, tall and dark, his face obscured in shadow. He did not move or speak, but she could feel his gaze fixed upon her. Paralyzed with fear, she lay still, heart racing, praying that he would disappear. After what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly faded into the darkness, leaving the room unbearably cold. Others have reported similar experiences. A couple staying in one of the hotel's historic suites both awoke at the same time, sensing an odd presence in the room. They described seeing a shadowy figure standing by the window, looking out over the city. When they turned on the lights, the figure vanished, leaving behind an icy chill that lingered in the room long after. Despite closing all the windows, the temperature remained unnervingly cold for the rest of their stay. Among the most frequently cited spirits in the Burkiani is the ghost of a maid, who seems determined to carry out her duties long after her death. Guests often describe the sensation of someone entering their room while they sleep, straightening the sheets, or fluffing the pillows. But when they wake, no one is there. One guest, a man traveling for a conference, was staying in one of the smaller, more secluded rooms of the hotel. He awoke one morning to the feeling of someone adjusting his blankets. Still groggy from sleep, he murmured a thank you, assuming it was housekeeping. But when he opened his eyes, the room was empty. Confused, he checked the time. It was far too early for housekeeping to have come by. Later that day, when he mentioned the incident to the hotel staff, they simply smiled and told him that the maid must have been tending to him. The guest was baffled. He hadn't seen anyone come in, and yet the blankets had clearly been touched. Another account comes from a young couple on their honeymoon. They had left their room for a day of sightseeing, only to return and find that their bed had been made with military precision. At first, they thought housekeeping had simply been thorough, but when they asked the front desk, they were told that no staff had been in their room that day. The couple, both skeptics of the paranormal, brushed it off as a misunderstanding, but later that night, they heard the sound of someone sweeping outside their door, though the hallway was empty when they checked. Beyond the apparitions, the Hotel Burkiani is also known for sudden, inexplicable temperature drops in specific rooms. One particular suite, known for being especially haunted, has left numerous guests shivering in fear, despite the hotel's warm climate control. Guests report waking in the middle of the night to find the air around them freezing cold, even when all the windows are closed and the heating is on. The cold is often accompanied by a feeling of intense dread, as though something unseen is watching from the shadows. One woman, who had stayed at the hotel on a romantic getaway with her partner, described the room becoming so cold in the middle of the night that she could see her breath. The sensation was suffocating, as though the cold was pressing in on her from all sides. She got up to check the windows, but they were tightly shut. When she returned to bed, she felt a heavy weight settle at the foot of the mattress, as though someone, or something, had sat down. Terrified, she and her partner spent the rest of the night huddled under the blankets, too frightened to move. The Hotel Berkiani, with its opulent rooms and Renaissance decor, may offer a luxurious stay, but for those who have encountered its lingering spirits, the hotel is far from a peaceful retreat. From the playful child who runs through the corridors to the silent figure who watches over sleeping guests, the ghosts of the Berkiani are a reminder that the past is never truly gone. For those brave enough to stay, the hotel offers more than just a glimpse of Florence's history. It offers a chance to come face to face with the unknown, where the line between the living and the dead is thin and fragile, and the shadows hold secrets that may never be revealed. As you've journeyed through these haunted hotels, each story may have left you with chills, or perhaps stirred memories of your own unexplained encounters. Ghostly footsteps, shadowy figures, eerie whispers. Have you ever felt the presence of something not quite human during your stay? The next time you check in, pay close attention to the cold drafts and strange sounds in the night. And if you've already had an experience, we'd love to hear your story. Or maybe it's just waiting for your next visit.